Let's talk about what I think is a perfect movie. It's the 1948 drama Bicycle Thieves. Historically, it's one of the more famous and influential movies ever made, and if you haven't seen it, it should go on your must-see list. Let's talk about it coming up next. Alright, so Bicycle Thieves is a 1948 movie directed by Vittoria de Sica, an Italian film that is the poster child for the movement known as Italian neo-realism. And neo-realism following after World War II, I think it actually stems from World War II, maybe even a little bit before. But neo-realism becomes very influential worldwide across the world. And maybe that's because these Italian movies became famous and influential, or maybe it's a spirit of the age in the 1940s, 1950s. Whatever the case, you've got to see this movie just for historical reasons. Part of this movie's excellence is in its execution of its simplicity. The basic plot just dashes right out of the gates at the very opening. You have an Italian man in Rome, a father down on his luck with no work. But amongst all the other men who are applying for work, he gets a job. His job requires him to have a bicycle to travel around Rome very quickly, hanging up posters. And of course, he has to have this job in order to support his family. We see early on that his family is so desperate that his wife sells their bed sheets to get money. And that money from bed sheets allow the man to go pick up his bike, which is at a pawn shop. The movie creates the environment of a city that is under the heavy burden of post-war poverty. And of course, a lot of places in Europe get hit very hard by World War II and its aftermath. Italy is no exception. Of course, the Germans had invaded Rome. And you can go see a wonderful movie, Rossellini's Rome Open City, which is an influence for Bicycle Thieves. Anyway, one day the man is going to hang up the posters in his new job, and it happens while his bike is resting beside him near a wall, 3 men come up and steal the bike. Well, that creates an impossible situation for this man. He can't work without a bike, but he has no money to get a bike, and no one is willing to give up their bike for him. So what's he gonna do? In desperation, he goes around the city looking for who stole his bike. And he takes his son with him. Something really important going on in this movie. You have a father-son combo looking for the ultimate thing, the bike that is going to keep their family alive. And I think there's something significant in the names of these characters. You have Antonio, the father. You have Bruno, the son. In other words, A and then B. And then the mother's name is the Italian name of Maria, which obviously has Roman Catholic resonances. Father gets increasingly desperate to find his bike. You know if he doesn't, his family's going to starve. And so this movie brings up the common ethics 101 question: should you be able to steal food if you are desperate for food and need to save yourself and your family? If you're going hungry, that is it okay to steal? Is it not stealing in order to survive? And that question comes up with his father, who acts by principle. The realism of the label Italian neo-realism comes up with, one, the hero as the father, a very lower class man. He's the featured player in this movie, and so you don't have a Western cowboy hero, you don't have a great general or president or leader, you have someone who's down on his luck, in fact is an ordinary person. And then the plot problem is the threat to the family of not being able to have money to buy food. And the movie takes place in Rome, although I've been to Rome a couple of times and I don't see any sights in the movie that tourists would commonly see. This is the regular Rome, the lived-in Rome of ordinary people who are actual citizens of the city. And of course, neo-realism usually features social, political, and economic problems, usually all three combined into one. I said at the beginning of this video that this movie is nearly perfect. I think it's perfect for what it is. Personally, I prefer grand epics, encyclopedic works that are about everything and the great grand questions of human existence. Such as, why do we exist at all? Why do we have to die? Is there a God? But you know, I get to these sorts of movies, and if they're perfectly or well executed, boy, they can be really amazing to watch. This movie is particularly touching to me. In fact, I watched this when I was probably 22 years old, didn't get it, didn't care about it much, and that was when I was poor. But now that I have several children, including sons, I can identify with the father in this movie, even though I'm not all that poor. So this movie does really exceptional work at getting you to root for this father, understanding his position, being able to feel compassionate for him, maybe even able to empathize with him. I think that's part of the movie's appeal, that it actually uses the father to represent a whole class or group of people. And movie watchers from around the world throughout the last 70 years have taken this movie have adapted it to their own circumstances. That is, this movie has archetypes. You've got a basic poor father and a basic poor son, and they're just trying to survive in a huge city. It's a common plight for millions, if not billions, of people around the world. And in its perfection, the movie uses cinematography, sound, narrative, storytelling, dialogue, characters. All those come together for the main messages of the movie, and in service of those main messages. Probably any movie made after Bicycle Thieves is quoting it or using it implicitly. Because any movie about social realism, social justice, the problems of city life, they tend to be hearkening back to this particular movie in some way, shape, or form. Now, one question this movie brings up is the individual against or with the masses. Major problem in philosophy, major problem in social psychology at this time and still today. When there's 7, almost 8 billion of us on this planet, what's one individual's worth? What's their purpose in life? And in this movie, you get several shots of the man coming from the crowd, the father emerging from the crowd or growing into the crowd. You see him blending with the crowd on the one hand, becoming one with the masses, but sometimes he also emerges from the crowd and becomes a unique individual highlighted by the film. I think this movie is trying to say in part that this particular father is like all the other hard luck individuals in the world, and in particular in Italy at this time. The father's story in this movie, his bike gets stolen, he's down in his luck, is just like millions and millions of other people. And thus I think you get these repeated shots reminding you that not just the father, but every single person in these masses has these kinds of problems. Thus Bicycle Thieves is not just about 1 or 2 characters, it's about whole social movements that need help, new social systems, whatever they are, that need to be put into place. Now, whether you're a Marxist, a capitalist, a socialist, any kind of ist, or you hear any kind of ism whatsoever, I think you'll at least appreciate this movie. You might end up hating it because you interpret it in a certain way that goes against your ism. However, this movie is so well executed, I think you'll get a ton out of it, especially if you're some kind of creator or critic yourself. And you can't deny the power and influence of this movie, as I've said. In the 1950s, you get social realist films, for example, On the Waterfront, the great movie with Marlon Brando. And then you get movies by John Cassavetes and Ken Loach. Shoot, anywhere in the world there's a semi-realist sort of movie. As I said, it's hearkening back to Bicycle Thieves. So for that reason alone, I highly recommend that you watch it. What do you think of this movie? Please let me know in the comments. And please subscribe to this channel if you haven't. Thank you and have a great day.
Ciao, Ma.
Ciao, Marie.